Since last episode, I memorized all the digits of pi. Now I just need to try to figure out what order they're supposed to go in. In part 1, we covered the history of the Mesopotamian area, from the Sumerian nomads all the way to the fall of the Babylonian Empire. We learned exactly why this part of the world is so important in human history, thanks to the agricultural and scientific developments that were made here. And because written language was invented here, the ability to preserve history for future generations was born. Thanks to this, though the Sumerian religion is not the earliest in human history, it is the earliest recorded religion, and therefore the earliest reliable look at human belief. So enough preamble, let's dive right in. The religion of Mesopotamia was henotheistic, which means that while they believed in many gods, they considered one or just a few of them to be more important than the rest of the pantheon. Interestingly, exactly which god was the most powerful or most important in the pantheon would vary based on who you asked and where they were from. Each city-state was under the patronage of its own unique deity, and that deity was considered by the residents of that city to be the most important of the pantheon. For this reason, the worship of specific gods and goddesses would rise and fall over time based on the power and population of specific city-states. The chief god or goddess of the pantheon would also change based on the capital city of the current empire. For example, the god Marduk, who was relatively unheard of before the Babylonian Empire came into power, became the chief god of the entire pantheon because he was the patron god of the city of Babylon, the capital of the empire. Speaking of Marduk, though there are no surviving records of what the Sumerians and Akkadians believed about the beginning of time and the universe and the creation of man, it's believed that scholars have pieced together a fairly accurate representation of those beliefs based on writings from the later Assyrian and Babylonian empires. Put simply, one of the gods, later clarified by the Babylonians to be Marduk, killed one of the goddesses, the goddess Tiamat, who was viewed as a primordial goddess of the seas. Marduk killed Tiamat and tore her body into two pieces. From one piece he formed the earth, from the other piece he formed the Sumerian concepts of paradise and the underworld. Now, Marduk and Tiamat are just two of the over 2,000 named gods and goddesses found in the Sumerian and Akkadian pantheons. So obviously we can't deep dive into the lore of every single one of these gods and goddesses, it would take forever. Even the exact number of gods that they worshipped is pretty difficult to determine because the Sumerian and Akkadian empires would regularly borrow and morph and adopt deities from the other cultures. It also makes it really hard to say with any kind of certainty which civilization any of the given gods originated from. Many of the deities of the pantheon had multiple names from both civilizations. Some notable examples of Mesopotamian gods would be Enki, later called Ea, Ashur, the chief of the Assyrian pantheon and where the name Assyria is derived from, Inanna, who was later called Ishtar, who was an important figure in really all of the Mesopotamian religions from Sumeria all the way to Babylon, and Marduk, as we mentioned before, the chief of the Babylonian pantheon. Though the roster shifted and changed over the centuries, there were always 7 primary deities worshipped by all of these civilizations. Now, this is where the mythology really starts to get fun. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by the Sumerian god An, also called Anu by the Akkadians. An was regarded as the supreme god by the Sumerians, and was also considered a divine representation of the sky. He was traditionally named first in lists of the gods. Despite this apparent importance, though, An was rarely worshipped directly. Instead, he was considered a passive god, a figurehead, or perhaps even just the sky itself. At the time, it was believed that the earth was a flat disk, and that the heavens above were comprised of 3 tiers of precious stones. An was believed to be the uppermost layer of these stones, overseeing all of creation beneath him. Though there is no historical evidence of An being worshipped by the Sumerians, he was traditionally associated with the city Uruk, alongside his daughter Inanna, who was worshipped at the Eanna temple. Though the worship of An dwindled over the ages, he was still considered an important figure even by the later Babylonians, and was possibly even worshipped all the way into our common era. In my research, though I was able to find evidence that the Babylonians did make offerings to An, I wasn't able to find exactly what offerings were traditionally made. But if you know, please tell us down in the comments. An also has connections to the Greek pantheon. likely being the inspiration for the sky god Uranos, who the planet Uranus is named after. Like Uranos, An was the victim of a heavenly coup and had his genitals bitten off by his usurper. Ugh. Unlike Uranos, however, An eventually recovered, reclaimed his throne, and got revenge against his enemies. That's a pretty badass comeback. But over the ages, the worship of this deity was eventually lost to the sands of time. Now, back to the video. As I was saying, this is where things really start to get interesting. Most, if not all, of the gods of the pantheon were pretty much human in form. They were very similar to mortal people, in fact. They needed water and food to eat and drink. They could even be affected by alcohol. They could get drunk. So, what exactly made them different from your average everyday mortal? Well, one of the most clearly distinguishing features was referred to as Malamu.
Malamu, I've come to bargain.
In Sumerian, it roughly translates to divine radiance. According to Professor Sean Zelig-Astor of the University of Pennsylvania, the Malamu refers specifically to a covering which demonstrates overwhelming and insuperable or insurmountable power. This covering can be represented by radiant and luminous imagery, but this is not consistently the case. So in other words, the Malamu was some form of covering or garment that radiated with energy or light. Later on, the Christian Church adopted this imagery, and it eventually evolved into the concept of the halo, but the original usage of the word Malamu was to denote this covering or garment, most commonly seen as a blinding source of light that enveloped the gods and inspired terror in anyone who saw it. It was even said that looking directly at the Malamu would make your skin crawl. They had a specific word for the feeling that the Malamu inspired in humanity. The word was ni. But it wasn't just the gods who wore the Malamu. It was said that also heroes, kings, and even demons were capable of wearing it. Now, there are a lot of interesting parallels between the Malamu and the divine radiance that is repeatedly spoken of in the Bible. At Psalms 104 verse 2, God is said to cover himself with light like a garment, and is regularly described as being so bright that looking at him would kill a mortal man. Additionally, after an encounter with God, the Hebrew patriarch Moses was said to have his face glowing with such brightness and ferocity that it terrified the Israelites, and he had to cover his face. During the Transfiguration, it was said that Jesus glowed as brightly as the sun. And in the apocryphal book of Enoch, it was said that when Noah was born, his skin and hair was as white as snow, and when he opened his eyes, a blinding light like the sun shone through the house and lit the whole place up. It was so terrifying to Noah's family, they thought that he must have been the descendant of an angel. These and many other examples draw a very interesting parallel between the Bible and the beliefs of ancient Mesopotamia. Were the Bible writers influenced by Sumerian mythology? Is there some secret about divinity that ancient peoples were privy to that we've now lost to history? Likely, we'll never know. But the references to the divine nature of the sun, not only in Christianity but in worldwide religion throughout history, is something to keep your eye out for in a future video. And I doubt that you noticed this, but I actually managed to get my hands on one of the Malamu. I'm wearing one right now, I just haven't turned it on. Let me flip this switch over here, and there.
Kneel before my power!
In addition to their blinding appearance, the Sumerian deities were thought to be all-powerful, or at least far more powerful than humans, all-knowing, and immortal. Like many of the religious pantheons to follow, most of the Sumerian deities were said to be related to each other in one way or another. The gods were also depicted as being giant, or at least noticeably larger than humans. In fact, in their mythology, being abnormally large was considered a sign of divinity, as we see in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Both Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu were divine beings that were much taller than the average human. The gods were believed to physically live in their temples, and giant statues of them were created for the gods to inhabit. It was believed that if the god deemed his statue worthy, it was able to possess it, using it as a physical shell to be able to talk, move, eat, and do a number of other things. Sometimes these statues were even hauled to battlefields so that the gods could observe and give their blessings to the specific battle that was going on. In addition to 2 daily feasts that were provided to the gods in their temples, there were also regular animal sacrifices that occurred, one of the oldest religious traditions in all of human history that can be seen repeated again and again throughout humanity. Human sacrifice was also performed, but this was a much more rare occurrence, usually only connected to the death of a member of the royal family. Aside from their temples and statues, though, the gods played a very important role in the lives of the daily people. Initially, it was believed that the kings had their own patron deity that protected the king and helped him out. But over time, this practice extended not just to the king, but to really the entire civilization. Every member of society was considered to have their own personal patron deity. They would develop a close personal relationship to their patron god, talking to them and praying to them throughout the day, and also maintaining a small version of an idol of their god that they would treat in much the same way as their big brothers in the temples. Often many, if not all of the personal accomplishments of an individual were attributed to their patron god. It was even said that a person's personality would, over time, begin to slowly shift to be more similar to the personality of their patron god. There are a number of written prayers that have survived to this day that show a very close personal and emotional connection between the common people and their god. That said, though, there definitely exists some debate between scholars as to whether these relationships were motivated out of love or out of fear. Some historians are of the opinion that these gods were seen not as mystical and mysterious like many future pantheons were, but were seen as very real physical entities who walked the earth. In the ancient mythologies, it was believed that humanity was created to be slaves for these gods, with the words Belu being attributed to the gods, meaning lord, and Ardu being attributed to humans, meaning slave. Humans were expected to fear the gods and have a proper attitude toward them or suffer the consequences. However, if a human was devoted enough, they would be blessed with success and a long life. The gods also expected humans to follow their moral code, which was recorded on the Serpu tablets. Let's play a little game here. Does this quote come from the New Testament of the Bible or from ancient Mesopotamia? Do not return evil to the man who disputes with you. Requite with kindness your evildoer. Maintain justice to your enemy. Let not your heart be induced to do evil. Give food to eat, beer to drink. To the one begging for alms, honor. Clothe. In this a man's God takes pleasure. It is pleasing to Shamash. Well, hopefully that gives it away right there. It is pleasing to Shamash, who will repay him with favor. Be helpful. Do good. These words, written at least 1,000 years before his birth, echo Jesus' teachings shockingly closely. In another interesting parallel between ancient Mesopotamia and the Abrahamic religions, premarital sex was also forbidden by the gods, something very uncommon in the ancient world. Could it be that Abraham, the forefather of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, had been influenced by the Mesopotamian religion? Well, he was born in the Sumerian city of Ur at the height of the Akkadian Empire. Before his family's departure to the land of Canaan, he spent his entire life immersed in a city devoted to the moon god Nana. It's unknown historically why Abraham and his family decided to leave Ur. As we mentioned before, there was a severe drought that was affecting the Akkadian Empire and eventually led to its downfall. So it's possible that Abraham was simply just trying to find somewhere fertile and not in a drought to feed his family, and was one of the first to make the exodus out of Mesopotamia and into the land of Canaan. Both Jewish and Islamic traditions hold that Abraham's father Terah was a pagan priest and idol maker for the Sumerian and Akkadian religions, but had a change of heart and decided to seek out the true God in the land of Canaan. According to these teachings, Abraham just went along for the ride, maybe to take care of his aging father, and when Terah died, just picked up the torch that his father left him. Christianity, on the other hand, asserts that Abraham was the main character of this story, the driving force behind his family's move out of the land of Mesopotamia and into Canaan. According to those teachings, Terah may have never even stopped worshipping his Sumerian gods. Whatever the case, it's clear that Abraham would have been very familiar with Sumerian culture and their religion. Interestingly enough, at some point along their journey, the party decided to settle in the city Haran, which was also dedicated to the moon god Nana. Was this just a coincidence? Did Terah never stop serving his pagan gods? Maybe even Abraham sought guidance there too. We may never know for sure. After the death of Terah, Abraham and his family picked up and continued on their journey through Egypt and into the land of Canaan. We'll follow their story in later episodes of this series. But now let's get back to the Sumerian religion. As we discussed earlier, one of the common points of religion is a belief in what happens to us after we die. What were the Sumerian beliefs on that subject? Well, they had a very unusual concept of the afterlife, one that I've never really seen anywhere else before. While it was believed that the gods lived in Samu, a beautiful paradise, humans were not allowed to enter it upon their death. all humans were relegated to the realm of Irkalu, meaning the Great Below. In Irkalu, their spirits would live for all eternity in darkness at the center of the earth and eat dust and dirt for all of eternity. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a horrible punishment to me. However, in their culture, this wasn't seen as blessing or punishment, but simply the next stage of human life. The actions of a person had no effect on their fate either. The purest saint and the worst criminal would both be united in Irkalu upon their deaths. However, there was a way for people to gain special favors in the afterlife, namely by being buried with their wealth as an offering to the gods. This sounds pretty similar to Egyptian funerary practices, huh? This is just one more example of the widespread influence of the Sumerian religion. But now, what would happen to a person if they didn't receive a proper burial? If a person's body was burned or lost in the desert, at sea, or simply just never given a ceremonial burial, it was believed that their spirit would cease to exist. Now, personally, that sounds like a better fate than having to eat dirt for the rest of eternity, but who am I to judge? Comment down below whether you agree with me or not. Would you rather eat dirt for all of eternity, or would you rather just not exist? Though Irkalu was considered an inescapable, eternal fate, there were times when it was believed that human souls would be permitted to leave the underworld to right some kind of wrong that had been left behind in the land of the living. Also, traditionally, people poured out an alcohol offering to their dead ancestors, and if these offerings were neglected for long enough, it was believed that the ancestor's ghost could come back and haunt the living descendants, at least until they began to resume these libations again. And I mean, I can't say that I blame them. If I was eating dirt in the dark for all eternity with nothing but the occasional cold beer to look forward to, I think I'd be pretty mad at my descendants too if they were forgetting to pour one out for me. Now, another common theme throughout religion is an apocalypse, or the end of the world. What did the Sumerians believe about this? Interestingly, there are no known records of a Sumerian apocalypse or any kind of legend about the end of the world. However, the Babylonian priest Berossus, in around the 3rd century BCE, predicted that the earth would exist for 518,400 years. What would happen after that time period is unknown. Doing the math and assuming that Berossus was counting forward from his time period, we still have about 516,100 years to find out what he was talking about. So let's hope that us humans are still around to see it. Now that we've discussed the Sumerian and Akkadian religions in some detail, what about their descendants, the Assyrians and the Babylonians? How did their religions differ? Well, actually, not all that much. The Assyrian religion was nearly identical, with the exceptions that the head of the pantheon was Ashur, the patron deity of the capital city Assur, and Ishtar, the patron deity of the second capital, Nineveh. Otherwise, the differences are pretty unremarkable. The Assyrian Empire rose from the ashes of the Akkadian around 2000 BC and was eventually conquered by their Babylonian cousins in 609 BC. After this, they declined to a point of near extinction until the Assyrian dialect completely ceased to be spoken about 100 years after their conquer. Over the course of time, the rest of the Assyrian peoples were slowly absorbed into the Persian Empire. Sadly, though there are people alive today who can trace their lineage all the way back to the ancient Assyrian Empire, these descendants have been persecuted and massacred, to the point that the few remaining ones left are dispersed around the world, while their homeland remains in control of foreign nations. Despite this persecution, though, there are still some holdouts who continue to worship the Assyrian and Sumerian pantheons to this day, serving them in much the same way as their ancestors did thousands of years ago. Now, what about the final empire that ruled from Mesopotamia? The famous, or rather infamous, Babylon. What did they believe in? Why are they demonized as an ancient source of evil, the antithesis of Christianity? And how do these long-dead religions connect to modern-day conspiracy theories of ancient alien visitors, a hollow earth beneath our feet, and secret societies all around us? Find out in part 3 of our study of ancient Mesopotamia. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like what you've seen so far and want to contribute to future projects, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, share with a friend, comment below, and check out the social medias and the Patreon. I hate having to plug all these things at the end of every video. It just seems superficial to me, and I hope that someday I won't have to worry about it anymore. But until the channel grows to that point, I really need your help in order to succeed. Every like, comment, and subscription genuinely brings a smile to my face and brightens my day. It gives me that much more motivation to keep going and making this kind of content for you guys to enjoy. And it doesn't cost you a thing either. Thank you so much for all of the support that I've already received, and for the support I know I will continue to receive in the future. I can't wait to see how this channel continues to improve and grow, and it's all thanks to viewers like you. And now, for your viewing pleasure, the conclusion of the Wasp Saga. He's back! I'm a Killian. Nope. Well, now he's dead. Struggle is real. No, you don't. You're not getting anywhere. You're not going anywhere. I'm starting to take a whole lot of pleasure in smushing them. Thank you for watching, and until next time, see you on the flip side.